Welcome back to another episode of Demystifying Self-Publishing. I'm your host, Alyssa, and today I am joined by Tellwell's very own Tim Lindsay and Monica Martinez. Thank you guys so much for being here today. I'm really excited to have you both. Tim, you were our first podcast episode guest back in January, and Monica, I'm really thrilled that you're here and willing to be a participant as well this time.
Me too.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So, Monica, we were fortunate enough to hear the Tellwell origin story from Tim on our first episode. I would love to hear it from your perspective just to kick things off.
Sure. Yeah. So we're going back in time about 10 years, actually almost exactly 10 years, like March 2015 was when Tim started Tellwell. So at that time, we were living together. We've been together for a couple of years. I was actually working at the local news station in Victoria called Check News, and I was doing anchoring the evening news. And I know Tim always wanted to start a business, and so he sort of soft launched Tellwell as a part-time gig on the side in the evenings. I was working evenings, so he had the time to do that, and he was working full-time. And then 2 months into it, he took it full time. And I just remember the business growing pretty quickly. You know, it was sort of like one contractor, but then it was the first full-time staff, a couple more full-time staff. A few months after that, he got an office, and then it was a full-blown business, you know, with clients and growing pretty rapidly, which was really exciting. And I was still doing my journalism job. So about a year kind of into Tellwell, I realized that I wanted to make my next career move. So I was ready to move on and do something a little bit differently. And I was looking into public relations, and I was talking to a couple different companies, and I was getting serious about making that move. And Tim sort of casually suggested, you know, why don't you come work with me at Tellwell? And I thought it was a crazy idea to have both of our livelihoods, you know, entangled into a startup. And there's just, I had some fear and uncertainty, like what if the business fails, or what if I don't like it, or what if I'm not good at it? Like, what's going to happen? And he was like, you know, it's fine. Like, we'll figure it out together. And it also helped that like he knew what I was looking for in my next role, and he had already created a job description that was literally like everything on my dream job list. And he's like, you know, we do need this position, and if you're not interested, like I am going to post it and actually recruit for somebody. And so I was like, okay, let's do this. And it turned out it was one of the best decisions that we've ever made.
Yeah. Now do I get the fact check? I don't think I casually suggested it. I think I put more pressure, and I think I did post it. And I'm like, okay, I'm doing interviews, and
Yeah.
by the way, here's this job we've posted. It just happens to correspond with a lot of your strengths and interests. So yeah,
You're
but
looking at Monica's resume, seeing the job she's applying for, copying and pasting into the job posting just to really sweeten the deal.
Exactly. So yeah, that was a year and a half later that I joined the company. So yeah, it's been a pretty incredible ride ever since.
Amazing. That's awesome. And so you had mentioned some of those fears early on and the uncertainty. What's something that you faced early on together in the business journey, and how did your different backgrounds help you overcome that and navigate it together?
Mm. Well, maybe Tim has a different one. But in those first couple of years, as we were growing in clients, growing in staff, we were also growing in costs. And so I think that the big challenge was just sort of the bottom line, getting the numbers to work and realizing as amazing as our growth was, it wasn't really sustainable in terms of the business model. And something really drastic had to change. And Tim's really good at the numbers and the financials and kind of understanding what it meant and being able to kind of catch these things really early on in order to give us time to actually make the proper decisions. And I know other companies who have gone under because they haven't been able to kind of translate the numbers correctly in time. And so we made the decision, I think it was, I guess, like 3 years in, to actually start an international office in the Philippines. Previous to that, you know, our clients were mostly Canadian, and our staff were all located in Victoria, like in our office, right, pre-COVID. And so making that decision was sort of a popular one internally, as you can imagine. And I know Tim did solicit a lot of advice from his mentors and people in the business community who also thought it was a terrible idea. And I think it was really like only myself who was really excited about it, and also maybe one of our other staff members at the time. But we ended up doing that, and it's really allowed us to create not only like a thriving Canadian business, but now a global international business. And we're actually able to grow and have the kind of, like numbers, essentially. It makes it a sustainable business moving forward. So I thought that was, very, not a riskier decision, but one that was, that needed to be made, and also an innovative one, and one of the best decisions that we've made for the company. And that was really led by Tim.
Yeah, that was definitely a big decision, and one that's turned into something really beautiful. And I think it really, it was sort of like, yeah, we grew really quickly and it was working well. And then we grew a bit more and it was working well. And then we grew a bit more and it kind of stopped working because some of our costs were going up, but we weren't productive enough. And so there's this sort of cycle, and this was like 2018. So it's kind of, I think it's one of the hardest parts of a business is like, 1 million in revenue and 3 million in revenue in there. It's where you're growing, you're building a team, but you have all of these needs as a business. And I think it's a very, very interesting and challenging part. It's also when you go from maybe having like 10 or 12 people, which is a nice little sports team, a team with a captain, you all fit in a room, communication is easy because you're all right there, to then having, 25, 30 people where you have to start building a management team and having structure. And but there was sort of like a cycle of things that can go wrong where it's like you need to develop your leadership skills, and then to do that you need management time to actually make things better. You need to nurture managers, but there's a cycle of things that can start going wrong, which is like if you start having customer issues, that creates stress for employees, that creates some turnover. The turnover can exasperate issues with clients. So there's all these things that can cycle, and everyone's feeling stretched thin, and then you don't have the management bandwidth to take care of everyone. But yeah, we decided to go international to work not only in Canada. Canada's still the majority of our clients, but the US and Australia and the UK. So we sort of presented that vision, but it became like a before and after. That's where we had to get really good at our customer feedback. And when we expanded the team, it created more breathing room. All of a sudden we could have a bit more upward mobility in Canada. We could create management positions in Canada and internationally. And we sort of got the whole cycle working in a positive cycle where all of a sudden our customer feedback was better. We were able to develop managers. We were able to have a bit more upward mobility. Our incomes were able to go up more in Canada. So it ended up being this win-win-win for customers, for employees in Canada, and then creating these amazing opportunities and this amazing homegrown internationally. And I think that's one where Monica's role was definitely pivotal, because I was on a CEO roundtable and everyone was like, oh, it's a horrible idea, horrible idea. But then Monica was supportive. And then our first hire, Pamela, on the Philippine side was absolutely amazing. And so, yeah, it turned into something really beautiful. And we've built this really cohesive team where everyone in Canada, Australia works very closely with, the team we have in the Philippines. So it's really neat. It's really neat.
Let's chat a little bit more about what that international growth looked like in those early days, because as a Canadian-based business and with the majority of you operating within Victoria, then going to create an office in the Philippines, which many people, I think, are unfamiliar with the fact that the Philippines has a really rich history in publishing. So can you talk a little bit about what the process looked like, why the Philippines was chosen from that perspective, and did you go to the Philippines to start the hiring process, or what did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, the Philippines is this growing economy and culture, and you've got these amazing business parks and so on. You've got companies like some of the top 10 Canadian companies, like what's the Bombardier's office, you've got Amazon's office, you've got all these sort of well-known international companies, but I think it's maybe normal for bigger companies to be international. It's a little more unique to have a small company that's structured internationally. But it was definitely one where the advice I had, again, most of the advice was like, oh, it's too difficult. But there was one CEO of a small gaming company, and he said, oh, in the video game industry, sometimes people try to structure their companies internationally. Usually it fails. But when it doesn't fail, it's because either the founder goes and lives internationally, or they get a really good general manager who has industry experience, and together with what we ended up doing, which was we would go there 3 times a year for a few weeks and build that cohesiveness. So yeah, the Philippines is amazing in terms of just the people, the professional skills, educated and culturally very warm and yeah, it's really, I mean, it's in some ways different than Canada because, for example, when we built an office, we had a Catholic priest come and bless the office, which is
In the
not
Philippines.
in the Philippines, which is something that doesn't happen in Canada, and yet it was very special to do that there. So we wanted to build from the ground up each person with our company culture and our systems and so on. So there's some stigma, but it's often associated with sort of outsourcing to like a third party company and maybe quality will go down, whereas we've been able to do the opposite, which is, have quality go up and build a really cohesive team. So the cost of living there is much lower than it is here. So I think that's something every company has to deal with. You have like the most expensive cities in a given country, like even Canada is very diverse in terms of like the most expensive city versus living in a rural area, or you compare Canada to San Francisco, and San Francisco is way more expensive, the cost of living here. So I think it just works out when you're trying to balance the needs of employees, managers, customers. I think there's a lot of benefits to have a team structured with places with different costs of living to balance things out. So it's also for a bootstrapping company. So we weren't a company that was invested with capital. It was more we built everything from each employee had to kind of pay for themselves. But the biggest thing is just the cultural surprises of getting to know people. And of course, we couldn't do that without traveling and spending time in the country because working online together in a professional environment is one thing, but when you actually spend time together and do social activities, you really get to know people in another way. And you start to see your own culture differently too. Like, I didn't realize how individualistic we are in Canada, for example, where we eat food and we have our individual plates, and it's just much more common there for everyone to eat together, to share, to have food together, and so little things I think like that are enriching to life.
And people don't realize as well, I think, just the publishing talent that exists in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And our office is based in Cebu City. And a lot of people ask us as well, like, why Cebu City versus Manila, which is, the capital and usually the area that most international people are familiar with. But the largest international assisted self-publishing company, they have their office in Cebu City. And so we knew that there was a lot of publishing talent to draw on. And that was one of the decisions why we chose that city in particular, and also the country, because there were other options. But that was the
But
pick.
there's also like not bad companies, but companies with poor processes and so on. You have companies like Canva. Most people know Canva, and it's based in Australia and the Philippines, and I think even in China they have offices. And so, but there's, yeah, amazing illustration talent, amazing designers. Our illustration team, we have illustrators in Canada, we have illustrators in Europe, we have illustrators in the Philippines as well, and they kind of work cohesively. So yeah, there's a lot of talent. My hope is that in the Philippines, there'll be some amazing companies that are actually homegrown there that compete, because there's also companies that, including, Author Solutions kind of has a poor reputation, but it's not because of the people. It's
Right.
because of the management, the systems, the company strategy, the company practices, and so on. So I think, you can look at companies like Bombardier, you can look at companies like Amazon or Canva, and Canva's, certainly a company a lot of designers use. And then you can look at companies that are not building good brands and they're going out of business. So in the publishing industry, there's actually lots of examples of poorly run companies. but that's not because of the people or the country. It's because of how the companies operate.
You have spoken a little bit earlier in the episode about some of the riskier decisions, and one of them, of course, was leaning into this international growth and that direction when mentors were not super keen about the idea. How do you support and challenge each other as partners in leadership, especially when the business enters that new or uncertain territory, or maybe the decisions that need to be made are riskier?
Well, it helps that we're both have high risk tolerance and we're both good with uncertainty. So that definitely helps. So I think just leaning on each other's strengths has been big. So I mean, I think we're both actually big picture and visionary type people. So we love talking about big ideas and dreams and what we want to do for the company. But Tim's really great with the financials and kind of the numbers and making sure everything's working out great.
Yeah, I should say on the financial side, Monica suggested it was tight at the very beginning, but that was also partly a decision. So I'm very thankful to our customers in the first 2 years for, in a sense, sort of taking the risk on a newer company. And certainly every time anything got difficult, like especially around 2008, 2009, this is sort of in those first kind of 3 year startup period where it's, a lot of businesses fell in the first couple of years or the first 5 years. But at that time, it's also, you have a choice how aggressive you want to be. So I think my mentality at the time was sort of put the pedal on the metal whenever you have any resources. Like there's always needs, so you're sort of putting, whenever you have resources, you're investing those to develop, and that's very normal for business. But then over time, that's quite stressful. So over time, then I realized, you know what, we actually need to have a nice safety net. We need to have a nice cushion. We need to focus, have a clear understanding of profitability and where we're strong, and be very conscious when we're making investments that these are real investments, not just operating costs. So now I sort of have, after reading, learning and growing and also making kind of personal life decisions, now we have like very clear criteria where we always want to have a very healthy runway. And I think we've developed super sophisticated financial systems because it's actually hard. You have sales, and then you have cash flow, and then you have revenue recognition, which means you have to, like, every little piece of work that you get done, you have to actually keep track of that because people pay you, but how much of that work have you actually done? So one little risk we took from the very beginning was investing in software development, and one little piece of that software actually tracks every single project. And as we complete little milestones, it refers to the invoice and it counts that revenue now as having actually been earned. We've done the work. So now I think it's actually something in the industry that now it's a strength of ours because, of course, you've got lots of newer companies that might try things, whereas we're the proven, stable, secure company with strong financials. So yeah, it's turned into a strength. And yeah, as a operator, I no longer want the stress of operating on so aggressively. But that said, it's still nice to take some calculated risks. And ultimately, when you're taking risks, you're not just thinking about yourselves or the owners, you're thinking of customers, you're thinking of employees. And since we bootstrapped, there's a lot of accountability in a business, just to customers, first and foremost, and to employees. So it's, in a sense, we're very lucky that we don't have that extra layer of accountability, which is around investors. But, now I say that's one way I've grown where I see that as more maybe differently. And Monica probably sees it differently too, because she's been learning about different ways of securing financing for other types of, for her own things outside of Tellwell. And so I think, if I was doing a business again, I would be much more open to using other people's money. And I think that's actually something societally that we should all get a better understanding, that you don't need to have your own money necessarily to start a business. In my case, I needed skills. I spent a lot of years learning skills that worked out for bootstrapping, but you can use other people's money as well. And I think that's something that not enough people understand. And so it's not as accessible, but it's possible to use other people's money to do really interesting entrepreneurial things.
I think it helps as well, when you're going into business with your significant other, it's it's nice that you can carry over the communication that you work on your personal relationship into the business. So we're not afraid to be, very honest with each other. And that is actually a corporate value that we've embodied. And so we encourage that with our staff and our team members, our leadership team. And so it helps when, we can challenge each other, not just us, but within the leadership team and every one of our team members, and have the space to actually solicit feedback and receive and listen to it as well. So I think that's helped us. And we also understand that good leadership, and this is something we really try to embody in our, planning and our meetings and things, but good leadership doesn't mean agreeing with each other all the time. It just means that we challenge each other, we listen, we receive and solicit feedback, and we're just open to ideas. And we also trust that whoever is, in that position can make, that ultimate decision and make the right decision after hearing everybody else's feedback.
I think one of the things that I personally have really appreciated about the leadership team and the managerial styles has been the ability to ask and then step back and allow for whoever is in that position to deliver. I think that trusting the leadership team or trusting your team members that you've put into these specific positions is a really great example of leadership in itself. And I also think that the transparency is something that's really valued among the entire company. I really enjoy the fact that, when we have a general assembly every quarter, that we do have the opportunity to learn about highs and lows and financials. And a lot of the time that information is often kept under wraps and people don't really know where they stand within a company. So I think that that's something that is important to both of you. And because of that, it's something that you've brought into the company. And I think it's just a really great example of how people really are the ones who make up the culture at the end of the day. And so that's just something personally that I appreciate.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's very nice. I mean, and we try to, we want to be transparent with our clients, but also it starts with being transparent internally, with our team members. So, and then kind of goes from there.
We need to have the right people in the right positions,
yeah.
right? And then we need to build cohesion, trust of some sort, trust as a foundation for that transparency and for the dialogue and for the push and pull. And yeah, letting people make the decisions that they're hired to make, if they're the right person in that seat, is what we want. So yeah, I think we have a lot of people who are making day-to-day decisions because it's their role, but we can give each other feedback, we can ask for advice. And not only every quarter we work on, we've done almost every single personality assessment or Myers-Briggs, or there's probably 7 or 8 that we've done as a management team, and sometimes with other staff as well. So that's been interesting. Monica and I doing these different assessments because we'll always start to see how we're different, how we're similar, together with other managers on our team. So yeah, ideally there's accountability, but it's accountability for results and for doing what people are hired to do. And if people are hired in the right positions, then they're making a lot of day-to-day decisions.
I think one of the things that we talked about through a leadership kind of program that was implemented a couple of years ago through some of the texts that we were reading was the importance of core values to a company and to teams, and how sometimes it's easier to shift a person or their responsibilities within the company if they embody those core values than it is to try to replace the person altogether. Are there other specific things that are important to both of you when adding people to the team or going through that hiring process?
Good question.
Yeah, it's usually 2 pieces. One is core values fit. They actually want to be in the company, want to, they make the team better. So there's the cultural side, and then there's the right fit for the position and the strengths and for that position. So you're right. Often if somebody's we look at those 2 dimensions. If somebody's a great culture fit, they have the values in our company, which is honesty and speaking their mind and frankness, but also caring with the intention to help each other and taking some risks, being entrepreneurial. And that's great. But then it's also, do we have the right position for them? So you're right. If they're a great culture fit, great person, but they don't fit the position, it could be the case that there's another position for them where they would thrive and perform well. Whereas if somebody thrives and performs well but isn't a culture fit, they maybe need to become a culture fit. Or it just could be the case. Then it's not like everyone has to work within the company for their entire lives, right? And so if we can find a way for them to, find a company where they will thrive in terms of it being a good fit for the way they work and for their skills, then that can be okay as well. It's not the end of the world when somebody moves to where they're a better fit, where they can thrive. And just because they don't thrive, maybe we don't have the right position, and it can be the case that an employee outgrows their position and we don't have another position for them. And it's like, all right, there's an opportunity elsewhere that's like perfect for you, and we don't have the position for you. There's no role, or we don't have the upward mobility, which is one of the reasons I think it's exciting to be growing as a company, to be getting stronger, to be succeeding, is you're creating more opportunities internally. You're seeing more people grow internally, which is nice to see, because you don't have to grow. You can be at a certain size and be comfortable in a certain way. But it tends to be more enjoyable to be growing. It's more stressful in some respects, but there's also more opportunities. It's more exciting.
What are some of the personal rituals or shared routines that help you both recharge and stay grounded, especially in circumstances where business might get a little bit intense?
For sure. So yeah, nutrition and exercise, like number one, definitely. So I do yoga, and I'll, train in a group class as well a couple of times a week. And my diet's pretty good. And when I go off of that, I can feel the impacts, whether it's like grogginess or tiredness or whatever it is. So that's really important. I do meditation. I've incorporated breath work. That's something that's a bit new to me, but something I'm working on as well. And then just a daily gratitude practice as well. I've tried different, journaling, emailing myself. Now I just sort of say it out loud or in my head. But that's something that I'll sort of it's pretty innate now. I just kind of do it like periodically throughout the day. But I think just being really grateful for what you have, it just helps to put everything into perspective. And then sleep is the one that I would like to get a bit better on. I'm still working on that one. Maybe when my kids are older.
I was going to say, with 2 young kids, that's a reasonable goal for sure, and an understandable one. I think you mentioned gratitude and practicing gratitude. And one thing that my husband told me, because I'm someone that occasionally struggles with anxiety, is that feelings of anxiety and gratitude cannot exist at the same time. And so sitting in your thoughts and actually pouring your energy into those thoughts and feelings of gratitude is a really great way to kind of bring yourself down, reorient, and center yourself when, feelings are a little bit uncertain, perhaps. What about you, Tim? What does ritual and routine look like for you?
Yeah, I think if you're managing in a stressful environment, it is like competing as an athlete. I drew inspiration even from mixed martial arts fighters. I wouldn't necessarily want to watch the fights, but I would watch the interviews.
Mm-hmm.
I'd watch the post-fight conferences because I was interested in the psychology of, how they approach things. But I think Olympic athletes as well, maybe that's more common to look up to. So Monica's right, physical health. I know after the 4th day, if I don't get exercise, I kind of turn into a werewolf. So I wasn't even aware of that in my 20s, I don't think. So yeah, exercise, cardio, getting 20 minutes of cardio 3 times a week, diet. I, used to love alcohol in my 20s and early 30s, but as you age, it's just you notice the impacts. So we spend way too much money on bubbly water. Family, one little ritual because we've had 2 kids since starting Tellwell. We got married, and we do a bit of, it's almost like we're a divorced couple who co-share our kids. So it's one thing we do is, in order to retain a little bit of sort of personal time, is one of us will sort of spend time with both kids, so that for me, it's like usually on Sundays I have that mostly flexible, and I can walk, I can think, I could do work, and so we do that sort of family management where we will create some space for each other to have a little flexibility there.
I love that. I think that is something more people could be doing in terms of, sharing that responsibility, but in a way that is a little bit more scheduled or managed.
Yeah. I should say the irony, though, is, okay, there's the personal freedom time, but it's actually the time where I'm fully with both of the kids, which is often the most, enjoyable and cathartic, and actually just giving your whole attention to being with your children. That's probably like the real free time in a sense because you're just engaged.
For sure. I think even, people talk about healing their inner child through being with their children and things like that. And I think that there's a lot to be said about just disconnecting from the real world or unplugging and getting to be really immersed in the experience of discovering or seeing the world through these little eyes that are just, figuring things out for the first time. So that's wonderful. Looking back on your journey so far, what do you wish you had known before stepping into entrepreneurship together?
Yeah, I feel like, there's so many things, but I would say, I think, I won't speak for Tim. He might have a different perspective, but I think I underestimated how long it would take to find a real rhythm in the business, and also how much of an impact external factors like economic cycles or just things like COVID, for example, that are just totally outside of your control. I mean, it was positive in our case, the impact, but just how these external factors that you have no control over, the impact that can have on the business. So that was something. Also, I think just the uncertainty never fully goes away. You kind of think maybe when you hit certain milestones that, a certain amount of like you'd have more certainty and sort of stability. And while in some sense that's true, like each new phase of the business, each new cycle with it brings its own level of uncertainty. So you just have to become better at kind of navigating it and being comfortable in that. Yeah. And I mean, also, like, I think when you're getting into it, like, that's going to be a lot of sacrifice. There's going to be, sleepless nights, and, you're going to be working a lot, thinking about work a lot. And you just don't know in the beginning whether it's worth it, like all the sacrifice in the end, if it's going to be worth it. And I mean, I would say like, absolutely, it has been worth it and it is worth it.
Yeah, I think the sleepless nights more it's affected me
Yeah,
being the CEO.
I
And she
agree.
has sleepless nights too, but I don't think it's worrying about the business so much. It's she reads these romantic fiction books late into the night, so I feel like there's maybe it's not the whole story.
Yeah,
I thought you were going to
yes.
say up with the kids.
Oh, that,
That
yeah,
that too.
that's the other one. Yeah, she definitely had a lot of sleepless nights, and myself as well. Not quite as many, but
Yeah.
So would you say that you are aligned in that thought then, Tim, in terms of what you wish you had known before stepping into the entrepreneurship journey together?
I've felt, I mean, there's been learning at every stage, and I still feel like there's some big pieces of learning ahead. I don't have any regrets about anything, so I don't look back and be like, I wish I knew this. I think there's
Mm.
been skills that have been necessary to learn and some painful points along the way, but I don't think there's really a substitute for just getting into the thick of things to learn. You learn a lot about yourself too, because every time you hit a barrier, I think that's part of the, growth mindset or looking at through a positive lens at every challenge. Whenever you hit a wall and you fail, in a sense, or you temporarily fail, you realize, okay, clearly there's a bit of personal growth that has to happen here. What are my blind spots? What do I not know, and what am I not good enough? And yeah, there are external parts of the environment, but there's also a world of opportunity in this dynamic environment that we live in. So I think sort of embracing that dynamism and trying to be self-aware enough that you realize when you have shortcomings and weaknesses. And it could be the case that like I'm not the right fit for my role, and my role's changed through every stage of the business. So yeah, but I don't really have any regrets. I think there's been a lot of learning along the way, but I can't think of a better substitute than just the chaos of getting into it.
Definitely. I think that lived experience is always the best teacher. And I think being able to remove yourself from ego to be self-aware and reflective and make any sort of necessary changes or fill in gaps that maybe you aren't able to fulfill yourself is also something that we don't often see from leadership teams. And so that I think is a really positive thing to be proud of as well. So Tellwell has published at this point over 5,000 projects. What is one of the most moving or memorable author moments that you've witnessed where the power of story truly came to life?
Well, we got into the habit now in our quarterly all staff meetings of sharing a couple of these author stories. And I have to say, like, they bring me to tears often. Like, they're so incredible. And it's kind of nice, especially Tim and I, we're not working directly with authors anymore in our roles. So just being able to hear those stories from our team members has been really inspiring. So the one that sort of stands out to me is Elaine Alec, who is an Indigenous author from Kamloops, BC. And her memoir, Calling My Spirit Back, tells her story of just being, like basically a single mom, dropped out of high school, was an alcoholic, and she just completely turned her life around. She's a successful entrepreneur with multiple businesses. She was named BC Woman of the Year in 2023. She's got, her successful memoir as a best-selling author. She's writing her second book right now with us. And she even got a traditional publishing offer that she decided at the end of the day she is an entrepreneur, and so it makes more business sense for her to just be a self-published author and manage that. But I think just those stories of resilience and people just completely turning their lives around and like being at the lowest lows and now kind of living their all-time highs, and it's just really humbling, and it's so inspiring as well. So yeah, that one always stands out to me for sure.
Definitely. She actually is going to be a guest on an upcoming episode. She recently booked in, and she is also an Indigenous woman who has used her ability to tell stories to also connect her ancestral roots and the healing practices through the Indigenous communities with others. And I just think that the act of writing can be such a cathartic experience and a healing experience. And I think that there is a lot of generational trauma that Elaine experienced. And I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with her. It's nice that you brought her up as that standout. What about you, Tim?
I know, I'm so excited to have her on the podcast and to listen.
Yeah.
Well, I have a handful of books here. Can I share some of them?
Yes, please.
These are some examples. Let's just pick. Well, speaking of Indigenous authors, Mary Jane Joe, she went to the Kamloops residential school, and this is like portrait, her memoirs of her experience at both the residential school and afterwards, and integrating with the larger schools. So I think there's a thirst for just personal stories about some of the history, because there's political narratives, and then there's just a need for these personal stories. So, and I think she's doing another book as well. Speaking of being maybe witness to important historical ones, I know this is one Simon Ogden would speak about, and I know this is one of the other people you've interviewed. Richard Lowy did a great interview on the podcast. And again, in the spirit of being a sort of witness to historical events for the Holocaust, the people who were actually experienced it, we're just at that stage where they're the last remaining people who have firsthand experience being witnesses through their own experience are passing on. So now it's the next generation, the people who lived with these people and heard their stories, and who now are sort of the next generation of witness. They're the witness of the witness. So his story is pretty incredible. He always knew his dad was a survivor, and he just grew up because he didn't want to talk about it. It was too traumatic to talk about, but eventually he kind of grew up. Richard grew up and realized, I need to get this story, because he realized it was very unique, being a Mandali twin, basically this researcher who's doing experiments on twins, and so a lot of traumatic memories. But there's this other little boy who he was with through this whole experience in 1944, 45, and so Richard, whose dad went through that, ended up producing a documentary about it. Finally, was able to pull these stories out of his dad and create a documentary, and that aired in Israel. And the other little boy, when they left, when the Russians came in that case, and they were freed, they never saw each other again. And so decades and decades later, this boy, he's like, what happened to what is it, Lipa, his little friend?
Yes.
He sees this documentary in the early 2000s. He's like, there he is. There's Lipa, the other boy who went through this traumatic experience, just trying to survive. And very just impactful books. This is one we're doing right now, Don Cherry's
Yes.
story. I read an earlier version, or most of a much longer version, but filled with stories of sort of behind the scene, being a family member of Don Cherry. And I'm just I'm marking it up because there's so many beautiful little stories. And Don Cherry's daughter, Cindy Cherry, created this amazing story and tells the behind the scenes of living with this famous dad. But just one little anecdote that comes to mind was she's kind of a tough mom and had a parenting philosophy of, you have to let your kids be tough and get injured. And so she let her son Dell, who we've been in touch with, he had some injury, I think. He was complaining, he had a sore leg, and she's like, "Oh, come on, knock it off. It's not bleeding, it's fine." And I think she sent him off to hockey practice, and then a week later he's like, "It still hurts." And they go to the hospital, and she's like, "Well, I hope it's not broken because I've been making him go play hockey this past week." And doctors take him away, and doctor comes back. "So who's the mom who lets her kid play hockey with broken bones?" And she's like, "That's me." But then she's friends with another famous hockey player, Ty Domi's wife. Cindy Cherry was friends with her, and she also had a kid of the same age. And her mom all of a sudden comes to Cindy and says, "That club you were starting about mothers who let their kids play with broken bones? I think I want to join that," because she had accidentally done the same thing. So Don Cherry's, he's more conservative, comes from a more conservative background, and so Cindy kind of makes the joke. She's like, "I'm sure this would drive granola mums crazy if they heard this story, but none of them will be reading this book anyway, so what do I care?" So another interesting story, just again behind the scenes. Here's another one, the 10-year-old man, Philip Lacko. I haven't spoken to him. He's in Australia. He grew up to a 10-year-old boy in a little South Sudan tribe, and at 10 years old, ostensibly to go away to school, he was actually taken away by this army, the People's Army, and became a child soldier. So at 10 years old, speaking of children having to go through a lot, for 10 years, it was 10 years later, he survived being in that child soldier environment. 10 years later, he gets to a refugee camp in Kenya, and he starts to dream, to think, "Oh, I can actually dream and think of a bright future," but he's from camp to camp. 4 more years go by with a bit of security, some basic needs met, but then I think a lot of pain when you realize you're stuck in this refugee camp for years and years and years. So then finally, 4 years, 10 years as a child soldier, 4 years in a refugee camp, he gets approved to fly to Australia. And he describes sort of his first day in Australia just crying and questioning, why are these people who don't even know who I am, why are they helping me? So very powerful story, and I've read maybe 3/4 of it, and the later part of his story is in Australia, and it's sort of kind of a bit of a culture shock, realizing so many, he does some elder care and realizing, why, in his village, elderly people, they stay in the village, so to see that happen, but he's now in his mid-20s, and where's his mom? He hasn't seen his mom since he was 10 years old. So there's a neat story in there where he's going to work his way back to his home country in Sudan to find his little village to reconnect with his mom. How many years later, almost 2 decades later. And so I found that quite a compelling story where he makes his way, and he actually starts through phone to talk to a woman, and I can't remember the whole story, but he develops an attraction to this woman, and he sort of makes a decision that he's going to get married, but through the more traditional norms that he grew up with, which is a more arranged marriage sort of environment. And there's some humor in there because arranged marriages are quite political, it turns out. So there's, negotiations between uncles and aunts, and everyone has their opinion, and there's, trades of animals and this and that. But he eventually works his way back to his home country and, drives down this road and reconnects with his mom, gives her a big hug, and then follows the traditional path to marriage, and then is married and has a kid where they're separated. He's in Australia, she's there, until she can reconnect in Australia. So he took that, his journey through writing that story, I think, was initially cathartic. It's like healing. As you write about things, you're taking stuff that's like potentially painful. As you write about it, it's, being integrated into your more conscious self. You're starting to bring meaning to it, but some of the pain can become, I don't know if less traumatic is the right word, but you start to kind of it starts to subside a bit as it becomes more meaningful. And eventually, a lot of our authors go through that. They go through something painful, and eventually, you don't necessarily want to share your open wounds. You don't want to share stuff that you haven't had a chance to process yet, but still, you can still write through that. And then eventually, you might turn that book into something that you give to other people. Turn your pain into something that is now helping other people. That's certainly a theme through a lot of our authors, is this sort of alchemy of experience where they take their difficulties and turn it into lessons and then help other people through that. He also does public speaking for refugee issues. He's built an amazing career in Australia. So I could go on. I have a bunch more books here. This is one last one. These are two kids' books. So this one is very critical when it's time for bed. That's the one I mentioned a couple months ago, because we have a 2-year-old who won't go to bed. So he loves this book. We've probably read it 10 or 20 times. I'm like, "You want to read this book?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah." And and here's another universal theme, My Daddy's Legs. This
Love
is
that one.
several years
So
old,
good.
but when you're a little kid, you kind of hang around your dad's legs. I think Father's Day, this should be a good one. But Fred Smith, I think originally from California, married a woman, I think in Alberta. Amazing artist. Not only does the story read really well, the rhyme and meter, as he says, but he also created a video, so you can watch the video. And I think our older child is 8 now. We've probably watched that video, 200 of the however many thousand views might be
They're
us,
credited to you.
together with reading it. So yeah, I'm definitely humbled. There's been a part of the journey where I'm just trying to keep the ship together and not feeling guilty that I don't have the time to kind of connect with more authors. And now I feel like we're at a stage where I'm less essential to day-to-day operations of the company, so more opportunity to connect with authors and enjoy that part of the business.
Kudos to you for not crying during all those. I would have been just in tears. They're so
Sobbing.
emotional.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So you had mentioned kind of a recurrent theme when talking about those books and those projects, and a theme that we often see, which is, wanting to document a legacy or leave a gift for family, or perhaps cross something off the bucket list, or inspire and educate others. How do you personally define success, not just in terms of business and business growth, but in the impact that you're creating together through Tellwell?
For me, it comes down to the question, I think, of what it means to live with purpose. And I've been thinking about that a lot. We have a couple of books on that as well. But I mean, to me, living with purpose ultimately is tied to freedom, having more freedom, and giving more freedom to people. And when I think of being free, it's largely tied into freedom of speech and being able to express yourself freely and share your stories and your ideas and your opinions and your knowledge, and to carry those stories forward without sort of, a fear of kind of being shut down or persecuted or something along those lines. And so when I think of Tellwell and giving people the ability to share their stories more easily and more freely, and creating an environment which is really easy for people to put their story into the collective library, if you will, and know that it will live on there forever, even after they're gone, and that in turn gives more people freedom to express themselves and puts more knowledge out there. That giving people more freedom in that way, to me, is just really satisfying, and it is a positive impact. I think it's also just a bit personal as well, because I did grow up a communist country, and with my parents from communist countries. So I view the suppression of speech and censorship in a very negative way in terms of its impact on freedom and democracy. And when I see the last couple of years that, there has been, I think there is a real censorship culture and censorship problem that, creators experience online on different platforms, but just overall sharing opinions that differ from other people often is taken in a different way and is shut down. So I think just an environment where we can be comfortable expressing our ideas and our opinions and our stories, even though it may differ from others, that we can also have the humility to step back and listen and have that conversation, knowing that that's fostering a greater environment and creating, an environment where there is more freedom. So to me, is there's a big purpose in that. And it's great that Tellwell's tied in is able to deliver that in some way.
Yeah, part of freedom is competence and building skills, right? That's how I see it as, and part of dynamic discourse is also uncomfortable as well. So there's dichotomy there. But yeah, Monica was born in Cuba and her mom is Russian from Moscow. Her mom met Monica's dad, who's Cuban, in Moscow University. So Monica lived in Cuba until she was 6 years old, and then her mom took her to the east coast of Canada when she was 6, and she grew up in Canada. So her dad eventually moved to Vancouver, became a math prof there. So yeah, I kind of joke that Monica in Cuba, there's no free media. I remember I was, a communist for the first part of my life. I remember reading a book, some American journalists interviewed Fidel Castro, and I was inspired. I'm like, oh, this is so different and interesting and unique. But I remember the chapter on media where he's like, yeah, you can't have free media because it's just, run by the capitalists and it'll whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that. But anyways, so yeah, no free media and not really much in the way of private property, and including her dad, worked to build their home. It's not theirs. So I joke, she comes to Canada, of course, becomes a journalist and was in broadcasting and book publishing, and she's interested in real estate and
all
so
the things
that you can't have.
Comes full circle.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think for the definition of success, certainly being meaningfully engaged, doing interesting, meaningful work, working with good people, having relationships, professional relationships, also family, strong family. That's probably an area where we could improve. We talked about giving each other personal time, but actually having more time together as a family, that's an area for our evolution. And the challenges of success or failure, I think it's nice to be doing basically challenges that are up to the ability that you're at, right? You want to be whatever level you're at, whatever skills you've kind of developed, then you kind of feel compelled to not let that go to waste, to kind of continue to challenge yourself. And yeah, finding joy in the small things though, like daily gratitude, but enjoying the little moments in life and the time you have with your kids. Those are a big part of success for sure. And I'm thankful. I think it's one way we've managed. Both of us are in the business, but we're also both spending a fair amount of time with our kids. So I'm grateful for that.
Absolutely.
And it's nice to see people at Tellwell sort of, going through life as well, building families and doing interesting things. So.
Definitely. I think that it's very rewarding, and it's always special to connect with people who are at similar stages in life or going through, having a new baby or whatever that looks like, and connecting over that as well personally. What is a dream that's still on the horizon for you, and how do you plan to reach it together? I know that, Tim, you are currently working on a book as well, so I thought that this could be a good opportunity to chat a little bit about that also.
Right. Yeah. So that's a luxury that I have, doing less, chaos in the company now. Now with things have worked out, I'm working on a book, right, with purpose, published for impact. So that's exciting. I'm looking forward to going through the grind. Right now it's in substantive editing, so it's been a journey. I forget when I started. I think it's longer ago than I meant for it to be. But we're going through the editing process, working with Simon on the editing, and I'm excited to do the grind of promoting it. Actually learning how to tell stories, practicing telling stories, learning how to do speaking. Those are exciting new areas of growth. But yeah, I don't know. Monica, what about you? What are some dreams ahead?
Yeah. Well, I think we also, a lot of people, there's sort of, we get asked the question of like, how does AI impact your business? And I think a lot of people are thinking like, how will AI impact our business, both like in a positive way, but also obviously like in a negative way. And I think the one thing AI will never replace is community, and it's just the personal connections. And, I think people have such a thirst for community and having more personal connections. And so that's kind of something that we're exploring is, what would it mean to have a Tellwell sort of thriving online community where authors can connect with each other and do, whether it's cross promotion or meetups or do festival events together or give each other reviews, whatever the case may be. And also the education piece that sort of fits into that. What kind of educational courses can we have that will empower all authors, whether they want to do it all themselves or work with us, but also learn a little bit more about certain aspects. And so that's the area that we're kind of in the early stages now of building. So we are building something like that, but I think kind of the big picture vision is having this, huge online community where people can connect and have all the resources that they need, even a marketplace of sorts.
And maybe community can be extended to in-person communities. So we've just launched our partner certification course, and I think there's more opportunity for honestly, for more people to actually follow through on doing their dream of books. It's like 80% of people believe that they would like to do a book at some point. And honestly, I think there's a lot of reasons why more people should. And yet it's like 2% who ever actually do because there's so many barriers. But I think if there's greater help out there in local communities than getting together in person, online communities are amazing, but there's also no substitute for actually meeting people in person. So I think through training people to empower people locally, there might be an opportunity to extend community to real life community as well. So yeah, AI is an opportunity. I'm very excited and curious and by the technology, love all the opportunity that comes with that. And yet there's opportunities to sort of position away from it and look for places things that it can't replace.
I think that's a good opportunity for us to pivot a little bit in the conversation to any industry updates. So we spoke a bit about AI. Is there anything else within the publishing industry, or more specifically the self-publishing industry, that you want to touch on in this episode?
I think there's actually some really exciting the industries like evolve and they have ups and downs. And I think there's a lot of people who are actually passionate about books and publishing and are starting little businesses. All businesses start little, and lots of people are finding ways to be entrepreneurial. And so I think there's a trend of people trying to start up small businesses and be coaches, build communities, and so on. And I think that's really exciting. And there's some really good quality people who are starting companies. So I'm excited to see that, even though you could look at it through a competitive lens. But I think there's actually lots of excitement there. And I think we're at a stage where we're more in the partnership mindset where we'd love to just support if there's a way to support other businesses or collaborate or partners. So that's one trend.
Okay, awesome. And we just have a couple of segments left. Two of my favorites. We have the Plot Thickens, which is a user submitted question segment. So I always post on our Instagram stories for those listening. Please be sure to follow us at Tellwell Publishing. I put out a call and asked people to submit questions based on the guests that we're having. So the question that was submitted is, how do you balance family life and having young children while running a business? So we touched a little bit on this and maybe the desire for more of that cohesive family unit and time, but what does balance look like for you at this stage?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I feel like our life is pretty balanced. When we're at work and we sort of work a typical work day, and then we, pick up our kids, and then we spend time with our kids. And then when they're in bed, then there's an opportunity to, do a bit more work if that's what we want to do. Again, like we talked about the weekends, usually like Tim will have one day, I'll have one day, and that's another opportunity of free time to use kind of as you wish. And sometimes that, that it does involve work. I think Tim more so than I for Tellwell at least. And so it feels pretty balanced. We're kind of over that really hectic startup stage, which I'm really thankful for. But it is, sort of, yes, we are, right? Yes, we are. But yeah, I think, it's just enjoying the moments with the little ones and kind of keeping the focus on that when we're with them. But it feels pretty balanced to me.
Yeah, I would just say actually running a good business creates balance. If you have good people, we're at the stage where we need a strong management team, we have the right people in the right seats, and we make good strategic decisions, then the business is working well. And Monica and I think right now neither of us are necessary to the business, although we still contribute actively, very actively, but I would say I'm contributing not the stuff I used to do. I'm doing sort of more discretionary things. So I think the best thing for work-life balance is running a good business that's winning and succeeding and you're making good decisions, because then it's way less stressful and it's a little bit more discretionary how you're engaged. And we have a bit of not like we're 9 to 5ers per se, but you can look at us as if we were one person. We're like super hardworking and multi-talented, putting in 90-hour weeks and so on. But we're two people, and so that means we're both spending lots of time with the children now, which is amazing when they're like 2.5 years old and 8. So I think, yeah, work-life balance, you just want to be running a good business and succeeding and having things work well, and be hiring amazing people like yourself and people who are great at what they do, because that makes running a business way better and it helps your quality of life. So yeah, I would say gratitude to everyone at Tellwell who does amazing work with what they do every day, because every day we're getting amazing client feedback coming in, and we like to share that because it just keeps everybody motivated looking at what we're actually doing every day. So strong client feedback, really a team that is not just motivated because it's a job, but because they really enjoy what they're doing as well. So all of that leads to work-life balance, I would say.
There's
Amazing.
also what your priorities are, right? I think when you have a family, your priorities change. You can't do everything, and you don't maybe spend as much time with friends, or there's your priorities shift, right? And so it's how you spend your time. And when you look at how much time we have, like there is time in the evening. It's just how do you want to spend that time, right? So yeah, it's a good life.
Definitely. Absolutely. Our last segment is he said, she said, rapid fire questions. So this is just a little spin on our rapid fire questions, which I like to do with all of our Tellwell team members. It allows for our audience to get to know everyone a little bit better. So I'll leave it to both of you to who these questions apply to. So between the two of you, who is the big picture thinker?
I think we're both big picture thinkers, but I think Tim's executed on it more in terms of Tellwell.
Yeah, we're both kind of like dreamers, and so maybe a bit more me for Tellwell, but then Monica's got dreams that overlap with Tellwell, but then also, new other dreams as well. So
Amazing. Love that. Who sends more Slack messages?
Monica.
Probably me. And they're not always Tellwell related. Like, oh, Tim's online, perfect. Let's talk about this other thing, house related or whatever.
And who's the bigger risk taker?
Probably Tim, I think. We're both have a high risk tolerance, but I think again, like Tim's executed more on the risk
Maybe originally I was, but I can see that changing.
side.
I could see Monica being more entrepreneurial, more risk-taking in the future and taking over in that realm.
What is the best decision you've made together in business?
I'll say just getting married and having kids. Is that business?
I was saying going into
No, but
business
it's,
together as one.
yeah.
And what is a go-to mantra or a quote that unites you when things get tough?
This too shall pass.
I like it. I'm a Lord of the Rings girl, so I feel like there's some little like overlap with Tolkien and that specific passage. So I like it. I'm a fan. And what is your favorite way when you are together or as a family to spend your time outside of work?
Probably going to the lake and swimming. We do a lot of that in the summer. We have a couple really beautiful swimming lakes nearby, so yeah, we'll take the kids and have a beach day. I think that's probably one of the most fun things.
Tubing down the river is a pastime of ours, but we haven't been able to with like a 1-year-old, but maybe we will again soon.
Amazing. I'm jealous because I love a good little lazy river jaunt as well. We don't have any that are super tube friendly near us, but I feel like maybe I need to look into that a little bit more. Well, thank you both so much for taking the time today to join me on the Demystifying Self-Publishing podcast. For those listening, please be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, or check out the full video on YouTube. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.